In case of nuclear or radiological fallout, people living around potential targets such as military bases and chemical plants may be advised to evacuate.
All right, Sublation Media viewers and magazine readers, welcome to the Sublation Magazine show. This is Sublation Media's weekly live stream in which we talk to the authors from the magazine and try to discuss some of the issues of the day and their relevance to the left. This week, instead of Ashley Frawley, it is Stefan Bertram Lee who's with me to discuss the left. But before we began, I should just say I'm Douglas Lain, and you can announce yourself, Stefan.
And I'm Stefan Bertram. And today we won't be talking initially about the magazine or the news, but a video that's been on the channel lately.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to talk about some issue that was raised by a Critical Cuts video that I created. But before we do that, I want to say to everybody, subscribe, hit the bell. Keep up to date with Sublation Magazine's latest content by following us on Twitter and Facebook. And most of all, consider supporting us on Patreon. Links are in the description. At the moment, Patreon is our only real source of revenue. So please support us there. Although soon enough,
and
we'll have
also
books for sale.
Doug's only real source of income. So if you want Doug not just to kind of be producing content for you, but to stay in his house.
Yeah, go to Patreon. Yeah. So, all right. Having begged for money, let's talk about this. Well, I should also say, listen, we've got Jason Myles in the back room. He's in the green room, I think. He's going to be discussing his article for Sublation called "Remembering Woodstock '99," and hopefully there will be a way to move from our discussion of neoliberalism into a discussion of Woodstock '99. Certainly, one of the differences between the original Woodstock and the Woodstock in the 90s, there's two of them in the 90s, was the Woodstock events in the 90s occurred under the neoliberal order. I'm not sure.
We'll definitely be talking about the 90s throughout.
Yeah, which is my favorite topic. So let's talk about this essay. How would you characterize our disagreement, Stefan?
I think you basically kind of said that Clinton would have liked to offer kind of significant economic support from the United States to Russia in the 1990s, but was kind of prevented by the state form of kind of capital and the state in the United States in the 1990s, and that you contrasted this to kind of the state formation the end in 1945, which allowed kind of the US to spend like a vast amount of money in kind of like quite a relatively generous way, even if not for generous reasons, in Europe and in Japan to kind of reconstruct these places.
Mm-hmm. I don't have any evidence to show that Clinton had any desire to that in the 90s, or that was in any way on the table. But I would suggest that the reason why it may not even have come up as a possible policy or an approach to Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union had as much to do with the change in overall strategy in the nature of the state under neoliberalism as it did with any geopolitical or foreign policy goals of the United States. That after the 70s, the state started to take a back seat to finance I have some written remarks.
That even if it hadn't even if it was not Clinton's like effectively in any way his thoughts, you're saying that kind of it would have benefited the US state long term or the US government long term to take a completely different tact in Russia.
Well, right. It would have if there hadn't been unintended consequences to taking that tact. I mean, it's not as though the neoliberal approach to world politics arose in error. It was in reaction to underlying.
Right, and it's going quite well for them.
So here's what I wrote down out of our conversation. I'd say, well, it's difficult to separate the interests of the U.S. state from the interest of U.S. capital. It is somewhat possible And my proposition is that under Fordism and during a boom, the state had more authority and acted in its own national interest with more assurance. Clinton came to power after the Fordist period had ended. The role of the state had changed. It no longer dictated to capital as much as it was dictated to by capital, specifically by financial capital and to a greater and greater degree by institutions of international capital. The role of the IMF changed, for example. By the time we arrived at the moment of Clintonism, the IMF was making more demands upon states, specifically on peripheral or developing states. Comparing the treatment of Japan after World War II and the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, shows a difference. The U.S. state dictated to Japan and the banks less so. There was, I believe, more aid given and fewer onerous loans to Japan than to Russia. The aim was to create a liberal democracy and not to secure profitable investment opportunities for U.S. capital. This isn't to say that the U.S. investment in Japan was altruistic, but rather that it operated under different conditions. From the White House's Office of the Historian website, I have a little quote. It says, by late 1947 and early 1948, the emergence of an economic crisis in Japan, alongside concerns about the spread of communism, sparked a reconsideration of occupation policies. This period is sometimes called the reverse course. In this stage of the occupation, which lasted until 1950, the economic rehabilitation of Japan took center stage. SCAP became concerned that a weak Japanese economy would increase the influence of the domestic communist movement, and with the communist victory in China's Civil War increasingly likely, the future of East Asia appeared to be at stake. Occupation policies to address the weakening economy range from tax reforms to measures aimed at controlling inflation. However, the most serious problem was the shortage of raw materials required to feed Japanese industries and markets for finished goods. However, the outbreak of the Korean War in 1950 provided SCAP with just the opportunity it needed to address this problem, prompting some occupation officials to suggest that Korea came along and saved us. After the UN entered the Korean War, Japan became the principal supply depot for the UN forces. The conflict also placed Japan firmly within the confines of the U.S. defense perimeter in Asia, assuring the Japanese leadership that whatever the state of its military, no real threat would be made against Japanese soil. So my proposal is that if the U.S. had approached Russia the way it had approached Japan, Russia would surely have been accepted into NATO, but on the condition of becoming a direct puppet to the United States. Instead, Russia was left in the hands of international commerce and allowed to deteriorate and fail. Part of the reason was because there was no longer a bipolar world and U.S. power could be assumed. The justifications for military action changed as well. However, another reason was because the aim of the U.S. state changed. It was more of a handmaiden to capital than it had been before. The state and its power was deployed by capital rather than the other way around, in service of capital. The picture surely needs to be complicated here, but that's my starting point. So what did you make of that?
I think I guess my kind of fundamental objection is that Russia in kind of even in the 80s and the early 90s was kind of far too big to do this. Like obviously the Russian economy at that point, especially if you take away the kind of people's republics, though with your sort of tact, with kind of a more friendly US strategy, you can imagine that kind of Russia might have ended up in continued association with more of the republics than it did end up being, or would have a much closer link to them if it was like if it remained like an economically dominant power, which of course further exacerbates the problem that I think Russia was just far too big in 1992 to do anything like this. I think if the United States had kind of really tried to prevent the economy from collapsing in Russia, it really tried not just to prevent that, but to try and kind of solve some of the problems that the Soviet economy had in the 80s, not to do shock therapy, but to, through a process of kind of Chinese opening up or like co-op process and this kind of stuff. If the US had pursued this kind of strategy, Russia would have left at the end like far too big of an economy, like bigger than Germany, for instance, or at least on the same level as Germany, while having a military force which is enormous, and kind of having the facilities and the money to keep this force up, which they lacked in reality in the 90s. So even though the US wasn't able to kind of disarm Russia directly, as they did with Japan and Germany, by destroying their economy Russia was steadily disarmed because they were unable to keep up kind of their weaponry. But I think if the US didn't have this, the big difference between kind of Japan and Germany is that Russia would have kept this military force. They hadn't already been economically destroyed. So I think kind of a more analogous situation is if kind of the 90s had happened as is, and maybe what the US could have done is actually take the kind of strategy you're suggesting in the early 2000s or something like this, when Putin was asking to join NATO and this kind of stuff, when they were already at this weak point. I think maybe then the strategy could have worked, but I don't think it could have worked without kind of the horrors of the 90s happening first through US intervention.
Well, when you say Russia was too big, do you just mean that it had too much of a industrial base, too strong of an overall economy? Or are you talking about occupation forces in a
I mean, just like
nation that was that large geographically?
A large economy, massive geographically, a massive army, and also kind of more people than even Japan, right? And I think also in the 1980s, United States had got very scared of Japan, so kind of overtaking it economically, right? And so I think if you kind of promote to US policymakers to do a Japan and Russia, they'd be like, what the fuck? Like, do you want to fuck us? Like, definitely not. We're not doing Japan with 10,000 nuclear weapons. Like, we've won. You're asking us to lose, you know?
Right, because it would have, I mean, we would have had to have some leverage in order to start dictating to to Yeltsin, say, on disarmament and restructuring the economy that we had in Japan because of they had been defeated.
Yeah, they had total control in Japan and Germany, right?
Right.
Apart
but I'm
of Russia.
Right. Yeah, no, this definitely needs, I definitely need to think more on more than one level here. Because but I do still think that there was that the change in the way power was wielded in the world by the U.S. state is a factor here, and the way in which the financial sector dominated U.S. policy is a factor here. But I do agree with you that if we were to try to imagine what it would take to have brought Russia into NATO's orbit right away, say in the early 90s or through the 90s, it would not have looked the same as what happened in Japan. But I
think also on the same level, I agree with you that it's very interesting to try and think about how would the collapse of the Russia have worked without the Reagan Revolution, if Reagan had never won. And then but also you think like events probably would have happened completely differently, right? Because one of the reasons for the Soviet Union's collapse in the 80s was in the early 80s, they engaged in like an arms race with the United States, a renewed arms race while they were kind of economically struggling, and lost the war in Afghanistan due to kind of large-scale US aid. And so you think if the Reagan Revolution hadn't happened, then things probably would have just gone very differently already, you know?
Right. Yeah, we should ask the question, to what degree did the change over from Fordism to neoliberalism bring about the collapse of the Soviet Union? You know, I mean, if we start fiddling around with history and playing what if games, then we have to think on multiple levels again.
It's also to kind of think like, to what degree did the US even bother with this stuff, not just externally but internally, because of the Soviet Union?
Right. Well,
and so I think these things are kind of intermingled throughout the whole process, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we shouldn't undercut the role of the international left when it comes to both creating conditions which created the New Deal, but also set the terms for neoliberalism to emerge in the 80s as well. I told you before this stream started that I've been talking to Spencer Leonard, the editor-in-chief of Sublation Magazine, and one of the things he mentioned to me was that we should consider neoliberalism to be a product of the new left, and I think it was certainly an unintentional product of the New Left, but there are lots of ways in which, sort of just on the level of appearance, it can be seen. The recent interview that Alfie Bound did with Mladen Dalar, I think is how I'm going to pronounce his name. It's maybe Dollar, but I don't think so. Anyway, he's a Lacanian leftist in Slovenia, and he mentioned that the student worker protests, and really the protests around the world, but specifically in May of '68 in Paris, created a context in which neoliberalism could emerge. He pointed to the slogan, live without dead time, or, achieve your desire without any impediments.
Yeah.
And as something that could easily be twisted into a kind of a consumerist ethos.
No, I mean, almost all the kind of situationist slogans would work as good advertising slogans.
Right.
Like under the pavement, the beach is a great advertising slogan. And obviously that's not kind of a dismissal, because in the fact that it works, that's how you can tell it works as a slogan. Unlike most leftist slogans, which are quite boring and banal, you can tell that the situation slogans were good slogans because they work in this way. But also, you might think it's problematic in some way that they could.
Well, they certainly didn't want to turn the revolutionary slogans into advertisements,
Yes.
for capital.
Yeah.
That was called recuperation. And maybe this would be if Jason was actually
can we just put him on
room. This might be a good time to bring him in, because if he comes back onto the screen, we were going to talk about Woodstock, and
well, I mean, maybe
let me just tell you what's going on in my room right now. my cat has come in here, and she's usually not in here, but she decided to hang out in here while I do the stream, and I've left the bathroom door open, which was a mistake. So I'm watching her drinking out of the toilet, which I normally would never let her do, but I'm stuck in this chair. So I'm made uneasy watching my cat drink out of the toilet, and now she's going to come back over.
Well, I was thinking, I don't know if you wanted to cover this when Jason is on. I was wondering if you wanted to give us kind of like a rundown for the young people of Woodstock? Of Woodstock 69 before we talk about that.
Well,
so obviously I know
Jason would be better at this.
Okay, then we can leave it. What you should do in the meantime is read all the comments in chat, because you do this show live and then ignore chat for the full hour. Oh, Jason's here.
Oh, Jason's back. All right. So yeah, let's bring him on. Thank God. Thank Jason.
That's Stefan's fault. Stefan said putter around for 25 minutes. And Ben just woke up.
I thought it was a lot. I thought it'd take a lot longer, but I think Doug basically accepted what I was saying in the end. So,
yeah, I was.
We didn't actually argue or debate. We just kind of gave our theses and we're like, yeah,
right. But it was worth going over, and I still think it will be worthwhile to think through this question of the neoliberal response to the collapse of the Soviet Union more thoroughly. But it's a major research project. It can't just be thrown off.
Yeah, and then also kind of, if we're talking about kind of Ukraine at the moment, how does kind of the kind of incipient response, not just from international states, but to some degree from kind of the Ukrainian and Russian states also, that kind of they're continuing on as much as they can with business as usual, neither adopting like a war economy. What does that kind of show us about kind of how strongly we're still within like a neoliberal era?
Yeah, that would be really. I didn't even Ukraine is not really adopting a war economy. The state isn't dictating the industry.
Yeah, I mean, they're doing some stuff like basically no one's paying their gas bill and they're still getting gas. But rather what Ukraine is doing is actually intensifying neoliberalism. Recently, a measure was passed and it's now being given a presidential approval, which basically removed all labor laws for all businesses which have 50 or less employees, which forms a majority of the Ukrainian working population. So basically, for the majority of Ukrainian workers, it's not just kind of some downgrading of labor laws, but rather they're being removed.
But Stefan, look what we've done. we bring Jason on and then continue the conversation. No, let's talk to Jason, because you had asked me.
I have a guest here, and I promised him that he has a plethora of breakfast options.
Well, listen, if he wanted to, he could do what my cat's doing. But okay,
what's that?
Drinking out of the toilet. So all right. All right.
No.
So before you came on, Stefan had said to me, why don't you tell everyone what Woodstock 69 was about? And that was a little offensive to me, because I was born after that.
Yeah, I knew that you weren't there live at the time.
He was the baby that was born in Woodstock. That didn't.
No, I was not. But I said, well, maybe we can get Jason to describe what Woodstock 69.
Oh yeah, I'll be more than happy to describe what I know about 69 is through anecdotal data from people that I know that actually worked it. Because I think I've told you before, Doug, the place I used to live in West Oakland, one of the guys that was there was with the dead for years. And there's not really good stories that I know from that. I'm sure there's people that have wonderful tales to tell about the concert and peace and love. But recently, in actually doing a little bit of research for this piece about 69, one of the things I wanted to know was, were there rapes in 69? Because I think when we look at 69, we look at this as the pinnacle of cultural achievement of the hippie movement. And I think when we look at the hippie movement, we tend to conflate a lot of other things within that movement, because they kind of were able to take a lot of credit for a lot of things that happened at the same time. You have women's rights going on, the American Indian movement, the civil rights movement, Black Power. Maybe you put those two together if you choose.
And on kind of a very materialist line.
What'd you say?
On a very materialist line, the invention of contraception, oral contraception.
Yeah, all this is going on. So one of the things that I found a really interesting article that a woman had written in the early aughts. She was older and part of the Woodstock generation. And one of the things that she talked about was the fact that there was only one reported rape in 1969. Mm-hmm. And it's much like 99. There's only four. I mean, one is too many. There's 4 reported in 99, but whenever you watch those documentaries, they always speculate, but there were hundreds more. We think there's 1 in 69. Think about the cultural climate of saying you were raped in 1969. Mm-hmm. Keep in mind the fact that Woodstock is moved the week before, because the town it was originally supposed to be in, Woodstock, didn't want it there. So that's why it's done in Bethel, New York, which is in the middle of nowhere. That was the first show we did in Yogaba, was in Bethel.
I mean, good they didn't rename it.
Bethel Stock. Bethel Fest. But there's, again, 69 is rumored to have hundreds more sexual assaults. And one of the things I read in this piece that was so interesting to me was, in this moment where there is, like you talk about oral contraception and how it changes women's ability to say yes, some feel the need to say yes because no is looked down upon. Mm. So we don't look at 69 as the same disaster of 99, because there's nobody's tearing stuff down, but you have the same demographic 30 years later. That hasn't changed.
Well, what happened to Woodstock to make it a cultural icon, to make it so significant in the public imagination? There was a film.
There was a film. That was literally it's the film. It's the film.
That's it.
It's the film.
Because it was the kind of thing that, like, before the 90s, if you talk to a boomer, you would they would likely say, "Oh yeah, I was at Woodstock." Mm-hmm. You know, like, you couldn't talk to any boomer, like no white boomer, yuppie boomer, who wouldn't claim to have been at Woodstock. I mean, way more people would claim to than it possibly could have been there, right? So it became somehow it'd be like being in Chicago in '68. Yeah, I was there. Right?
National convention.
Only for a completely different set of people.
I went to Kent State when the shooting happened.
Yeah, yeah. As a National Guard, I was in the National Guard. No, but what you just think it was a film that made that such a
but
big
why the film, right? We have to ask ourselves why just the film, because there's also a film about Altamont that cements Altamont as kind of the ending of the hippie era as well. Mm-hmm. That film does a couple things. Number one, it puts Michael Lang in this almost magical place as the concert promoter that staved off a possible riot by making the show free. Why would the hippies riot if they're so wonderful? If the show wasn't free, they knew they were going to have to pay. These are questions that are never brought up in either festival, right? Mm-hmm. And they're never brought up because when you bring those questions up, you destroy the narrative that has been baked in since 70 when the Oscar-winning documentary comes out. That documentary saves their behinds a little bit because they do it kind of like whatever. They didn't think anything of it. Documentaries didn't make money. After Woodstock 69, they're hit with over 80 lawsuits.
Fucking hell.
Mm-hmm. Only they settled for most, and I think a lot got thrown out.
Those were people who were like natives to the area who were suing them for damage to their property.
Farmers. We don't even know how many musicians sued them. No one really talks about if they didn't get paid or not. We don't know, right? Mm-hmm. So they lose over $2 million, but they can pay it off because one of the Woodstock promoters is a trust fund baby. And the original capital comes from his trust fund. And Woodstock is done because 2 trust fund kids from New York want to be venture capitalists, and they're literally put an ad out in the newspaper. We're looking for something to invest our money in. Right?
Like it's all crypto.
I really wish I knew these people.
This is 1969. So think about this for a second, Stefan. They put everything together so quick. It's another thing. They put everything together so quick. Festivals take a long time to plan out because you need an infrastructure because you're building out a small city. Yeah. There's a level of hubris with these dudes where they don't think about building out a small city. Originally, Woodstock, they only wanted 50,000 people. They didn't want that many people. They sold 100,000 tickets. Mm. They took that and got loans like, hey, we're going to get even more walk up. So within the live music business, there's a pre-sale and there's walk up. Mm-hmm. When you're pitching your show, when you're pitching your artist, if you don't get a lot of pre-sale, like there's certain genres of music where people just don't buy tickets in advance. Usually more rock music, people walk up and they buy a ticket. So if you're pitching a show, you'll be like, we don't do good pre-sale numbers, but the walk-up is huge. So don't be alarmed at the pre-sale. You're going to have a big walk-up. So they knew the walk-up for this was going to be huge. But the walk-up got insane when word got out that it was free. 50,000 people were inside because, again, they had to move it within 7 days of cancellation for the first site. At that point, anywhere else in the festival world, you're canceling the festival. Had information flowed the way it flows now, not one artist would have done it. Because you would have known you're moving the week of, you got to build out an infrastructure. Is there power? How much money do you really have?
Yeah, I mean, I was reading the Wikipedia article, and you say like build a small city, but for this festival, it sounded more like a refugee camp.
Pretty much, it's really what it was. I believe there was one shower. There was one shower. 300,000.
That's no worse than none.
Mm-hmm. So when we talk about Woodstock, we should talk about it in the same vein as Fire Festival, but we don't. Because the people that control the narratives, and I know Doug understands this, they controlled that narrative for the last 40 years. There's a reason why you have Back to the Future, Forrest Gump, That Thing You Do, this love affair with the boomer generation as being the perfect time. You know, we invented rock and roll. We invented activism. We invented the Modern Music Festival. Rock and roll was only good in our generation. All that definitely gets cemented with the Woodstock documentary. Jimi Hendrix iconic playing of the Star Spangled Banner is to an empty field. Everybody was leaving. And they trashed that place. But do you want to remember Jimi Hendrix playing to nobody and trash? But now we can frame it where Jimi Hendrix, some people even think he opened the show. Richie Havens opened the show. Right? So the frame.
Sha Na was there.
Were they?
Yeah, Sha Na was at Woodstock 69.
When I looked at the bill, I was kind of shocked, and then I wrote the piece, and I got a response from a cat that's older than us, but was part of the punk scene in Athens, Georgia. Made a really good documentary about it, and hit me up and goes, the Who's Teenage Wasteland was about what they saw from the stage at Woodstock.
I can believe it.
It was a nightmare. It took them, I think, a little over a week just to do the cleanup. And it cost 10 times more to get the spot because they had nowhere to put it. And they knew this was going to be such a huge money-making venture because, again, you pre-sold 100,000 tickets. You knew the
Sha Na. Sha Na was a retro 50s doo-wop group.
They were on some TV show in the 80s.
They're thought, I think of them as like 70s nostalgia for the 50s, but they were at Woodstock. So I don't know.
Have we made explicit that this is an article in the magazine about?
You wrote Remembering Woodstock 99.
Can I tell people what the original title was supposed to be?
Yeah. What was your idea of the title?
Peace sells, but who's buying?
And someone changed that at Sublation Magazine?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Was it Gene that changed that?
It's a good title in kind of reference form, but I don't know if it's a good title, like clicking on it.
I thought it would be a good title to bring people that don't normally read, Marxist literature to the fold. I'm always thinking.
No, I mean, I often think of clever titles, but then in the end, you're like, well, I should probably just fucking tell them what it is.
It's okay. I'm not mad. My whole goal was to have Dave Mustaine from Megadeth see it and retweet it, but that didn't happen.
Okay, I'm going to say Sha Na one more time, and then I'm going to stop. But the reason I bring them up is because it casts to think of a 50s doo-wop tribute band at Woodstock changes your vision of what Woodstock was. It was not just Jimi Hendrix. It was not just the hippie music, the top iconic bands, Janis Joplin. Who's the guy who sang with a little help from my friends at
Joe Crocker.
Joe Crocker. It wasn't just Joe Crocker. It was also Sha Na and a whole bunch of other acts that were just musical acts, or just entertainers that were.
Well, you got to fill the time. I mean, no one has a. Yeah, he thinks that. We don't have any proof that that's true, right?
That clever titles don't work.
You got to experiment. Try it out.
Yeah.
That's on the table every so often.
I think we got to do some A/B testing.
But you got to fill that time. That was 3 days, and they wanted 24-hour music. So you have to fill that time first and foremost.
They wanted 24-hour music.
They wanted it to not stop. And another thing that people don't understand about Woodstock, had the National Guard not come in to help with the heat stroke people and the overdose people, I think like 1,400 people were airlifted.
Wow.
Through the National Guard. And there was also the governor wanted to come in and invade. There was a bunch of that moment gets looked at as we were so important. The governor wanted to come in and invade. It's like, yeah, they just wanted to bust people smoking pot, because there's a bunch of pot smokers.
Jason, do you want to move before we talk about Woodstock 99 through kind of the shitty intermediary Woodstocks?
94?
Including 94 and other ones.
It was 94.
I was looking at Wikipedia and it was like,
I want to ask a question here that will come back to maybe, because one of the things that's kind of in this piece is the most important part of this piece is something you mentioned earlier, Stefan, which was that it sort of correlates with it. You said, the slogans, the radical slogans of 68 in Paris, the situationist slogans, could easily be transformed into advertising slogans later on and be part of advertising campaigns later on. Like, live without dead time. It could be like a part of a slogan for a vacation holiday, right? Or a trip to Disney World, live without dead time. Don't ever conform, be who you really want to be. That's an Apple ad, right? So how was Woodstock 69 even a way of transforming the counterculture into which might have had some rebellion in it, might have had some politics to it, maybe. I mean, I'm not sure it did, but maybe it did. How was it
Woodstock? I think the people behind it. Are you asking me, or you guys?
Like, well, I'm asking you. Yeah, like, do you think that Woodstock originally, the actual concert, was an attempt to transform the spirit of the countercultural wing of the New Left into a product?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's all it was. Like I said, 2 venture capitalists reached out and they they got a hold of a music industry insider. I can't remember the guy's name. He was a producer. He produced Dead Man's Curve for Jan and Dean. And he knew Michael Lain, who was kind of a budding concert promoter. And Lain had just done an outdoor show in New York for about 25,000. That's a lot of people, with where Hendrix played. So Lain was supposed to be like the guy. And he had all the hippie air to him. Both of these.
What were they recuperating then? Like what spirit or idea or countercultural rebellion?
There was no counterculture. They wanted to build a recording studio in Woodstock, New York, because a lot of cats had moved up there. So that's why the whole festival was supposed to be in Woodstock, and they felt like the good way to build this recording studio. Remember, the venture capitalists want an investment. They're like, well, hey, we want to build a recording studio, and what if we throw a concert in Woodstock, New York? We got all these bands that kind of live up here, and we can take the proceeds from that. We can build out this sick ass recording studio. It's going to cost us like $1 million or so to build it out the way we want it.
But wasn't it connected to the protests against the Vietnam, at least in the public imagination, that these bands, this lifestyle, these kids, the hippies were opposed to the Vietnam War and were rejecting the U.S. society as it was?
Were they rejecting capitalism? I don't know. I mean, were they mad about the Vietnam War? I asked that question to Norm Finkelstein, and he was like, people had something to lose in the 60s. We have to keep that in mind. 99 and 69 and even 94. I mean, Stefan, you're in your mid-20s. What do you really have to lose at this point other than your national health care service? Like, what are you really scared to lose? There's no big wars going on where you're going to get drafted.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when I was 21, I wasn't scared to lose anything. That's why I went to war, even though there was no need for me to.
It's like when there's nothing at stake for you, when education isn't at stake, you got to keep in mind, a lot of these people went to school for free. This is New York. The CUNY schools were free. University of California schools were free. So free education was something that people like Reagan railed against. So the Goldwater wing of the GOP was a real frightening thing, coupled with Vietnam. And Vietnam, for a lot of people, even for the more conservative people, was a frightening thing because their kids were either not coming back home at all, or they were coming back home with mental and physical ailments.
Yeah, but I mean, 64 at Berkeley, you had the free speech movement, which was coming out of the civil rights movement, which was not aimed at trying to protect or hold on to free education. That was taken for granted It was about wanting to change the institutions of higher learning, to occupy them in a sense, transform them, so that people could, as the situationists would say, like live freely, be actualize themselves, be more than just the products of this Fordist institution that would transform them into free individuals, into punch cards in a bureaucracy. So like in the early 60s and mid 60s, the new left at Berkeley was about free speech and about empowering students and creating bottom up power against the state, which was providing them free education at that time. They weren't trying to protect that state or the society that they had. They were trying to improve it upon it and realize it, I think.
In 64?
In 64 and 65, all the way up to 68, I think.
I mean, I don't remember the year where tuition comes down at the University of California schools. I want to say it's during Reagan's years as governor.
When they got rid of free tuition.
Mm-hmm. I could be wrong.
I'll look.
Drum roll.
Let's see. The history of UC tuition. It's not like just a date. They don't just give me a date. Google doesn't just say it ended here. It's like an article.
Of course.
Let me. So move on, and I'll let's see.
So I was talking about kind of like what the TikToks of Woodstock would have been, and they're probably right that it would have been absolutely horrifying. Everyone would have been instantly, everyone would have fled after the first day. You said no one would come. The bands wouldn't have come if you had modern information.
The bands wouldn't. It would have been Fire Festival.
But the audience probably would have also left after all the shit they saw.
Everybody, dude, when you think about Fire Festival, Stefan, and everybody replays it. I just watched again the Fire Festival documentary a couple days, maybe 5 days ago. And the jokes people had about it, I thought were so stupid. And when I was like, if you pay $1,500 to see Blink-182, you deserve what you get. And everyone laughed. It's like, nah, dude, you're not paying you're paying for the exclusive.
Yeah, they pay to go to a sick island.
Yeah.
Hang out.
The music that's in the background is whatever. That's kind of what being that stupid rich is all about. It's like when people have Lenny Kravitz playing in their lunchroom when tech was really taking off, and they were like, we want to have Green Day played in the cafeteria today. It's not because everybody loves Green Day. It's because you have so much stupid money that you threw it at Green Day like this and had them play your cafeteria as background noise. You know what I mean? So Fire Festival is just which I think is not an anomaly. I think that is the model moving forward when it comes to what people really want, because in working in the music festival world, it is all about exclusivity, VIP packages.
Yeah, luxury resort plus bands.
So it was 1968, according to this, that the registration fee for all students is $300 per year, and non-resident tuition is $1,000 and $1,200 a year.
Was Reagan the governor at that time? I thought that was still Jerry. Yeah. Was Reagan was governor?
A guy in the comments said that he was paying $300 a semester in the 80s, so that would line up with the 1200 theory. So from 1968 to the 80s, it would have been 300, 1200.
Yeah, and they talked about fees instead of tuition for a long time in California in order to kind of obscure the fact that it's just a fee, kind of like
like an administration fee. Yeah.
These aren't the words we're looking for. It's just a fee.
That's right.
But if you want to, give me 1 second, Doug. I got to plug. Hold on.
Okay.
You didn't go to Woodstock 99, did you?
No. Nor did I go to Woodstock 94. I could have, but I didn't. But no one cared about. They may have had more people, but Woodstock 94 and Woodstock 99 did not matter to the overall culture the way Woodstock originally did. It did not have
in the
any
news
cachet.
sphere.
there's no music festival. Like when we think about music festivals and cultural iconic festivals, again, there's a Academy or an Oscar award winning movie that comes out the next year that cements this moment in time for us as one of the most important moments ever. These are still also the same people that keep showing you how wonderful this generation is. The Big Chill. Like I can't
Yeah, but the Big Chill was all about, how that generation had lost itself.
But it doesn't matter. They're still in your face.
Oh yeah, I know that's true. But I mean,
that's the whole
of course
thing.
they are. They're in their 30s.
Remember the show 30 something? Like this generation doesn't go away, right? So of course Woodstock is going to be the moment that we look at as the pinnacle of music festivals. I believe there was more people at the US Festival in '83.
Mm-hmm.
But who the hell talks about the US Festival?
94 Woodstock was just trying to sell nostalgia.
Yes.
For the '69 festival, and around that same time in the early '90s, like the Who went back on tour, and of course Rolling Stones were back on tour.
Yeah, Rolling Stones were on Beverly Hills 90210, if you remember, advertising their tour. Like that was Beverly Hills 90210 did a whole episode around them trying to get tickets to go see the Stones. And I'm like, what high school kids in 92 give a shit about the Rolling Stones?
Well, some of them might have remembered David Bowie and Mick Jagger singing Dancing in the Streets on MTV from 1987. But that's it. Or Let's Work from Rolling Stone.
Those same kids remembered Wang Chung. They weren't trying to go see fucking Wang Chung dance tonight at the local fucking county fair. So it's foolish to think that a bunch of high school kids.
Well, because you couldn't see the stop motion animation at the county fair that made that so good.
Doug was like, I didn't know that we're going to have a Wang Chung reference.
Yeah. Everybody Wang Chung tonight. That video was awesome. I mean, I had seizures watching it, but it was the best.
Do you remember Full House? Did a whole show where John Stamos got to play drums for the Beach Boys, and it was like his dream come true to play drums in Kokomo. You're supposed to be this rock guy, and you want to play the most easy listening, chilling on a beach anthem. Kokomo.
Was Jimmy Buffett brought in as a session player on Kokomo?
Side note, John Stamos still does tour with the Beach Boys playing drums.
Yeah.
Really.
Anyway, sorry. These, I should be wearing my Nixon now more than ever shirt right now because these are dated references.
Have you guys talked about Woodstock 99 yet? Because I think we've been here for about half an hour.
Okay.
Yeah, we will. Okay, we will. Don't be so impatient. We still have to talk about.
I want to hear about new metal.
We
gotta have a new metal conversation.
So 94 was nostalgia. 99 was something else, right? Woodstock
99 was the same nostalgia. They still trying to cash on nostalgia. Like 94, we got to remember is a kind of interesting year for Woodstock because 94 is around the death of grunge. So if you think of the 60s as this important rock moment, as the rock journalists talk about, the 90s is a resurgence of that feeling of importance. So there's a lot of snobbery in journalism in general, right? And the grunge movement kind of putting the death nail to a lot of the silly decadence of hair metal. And I say grunge with the tongue kind of implanted in my cheek, just so you guys think of bands with plaid shirts and brooding vocalists, because I don't feel that's a genre of music. It's a fashion style. Yeah. But Nirvana, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Stone Temple Pilots. Ben, who else is a grunge band? That was big. What's Billy Corrigan's band? Smashing Pumpkins, all that
Smashing
bullshit.
Pumpkins, yeah.
Thank you.
You bring Ben in here. Get him on the camera.
A, there's not enough room. B, he is in his sleepy time clothes still.
Okay, that's all the better. I want to see Ben Burgess in his sleepy time clothes.
I got up.
The fact that you called them sleepy time clothes draws a picture. Gives me a picture. He's got like a nightcap on, doesn't he? He's got a little nightcap.
Everybody, I woke up early and tried to tiptoe around the house not to wake him up. But all that music was being deemed as important music. So 94 was going to be a resurgence of this important stuff, right? It's the peace and love movement all over again. There's a lot of similarities. There's a resurgence of the peace symbol in the 90s. So you have a lot of 60s nostalgia in 94. Also, what makes 94 not go off is the fact that 200,000 people plus got in for free. So much like 69, there's infrastructure problems galore. From people that have hit me up since reading the piece, they're like, I was at 94. It smelled like shit. Everybody was mad, but fuck it, we were in for free, right? So people that weren't stoned out of their mind and paid for tickets were definitely upset, but they weren't the majority because so many people got in for free. So when we think about 94, there's iconic performances that come out of 94 that launch careers. It's the year that Dookie comes out, Green Day plays, a mud soaked show where Billy, I can't think of his last name for some reason, Billy Joe is eating mud, but it's really boo-boo because the porta potties that overflow, they weren't swimming in mud. They were swimming in boo-boo. And
both are bad.
And they're throwing boo-boo all over. You know, it's a disgusting display. And they lose money again. But merchandising, and here's the silent part that no one talks about. Merchandising, the name is valuable because they've proven 2 times we can bring hundreds of thousands of people out. Who do you think wants to pay for your festival at that point? Corporations, sponsorship. And sponsorship doesn't really get put into the stratosphere until we see things like Coachella. Warped Tour definitely becomes a way to sell young people energy drinks. You know, that's really all it is, right?
To be clear, those 2 nerds who put out an advertisement in the newspaper, were they involved also in the later ones?
No.
Okay.
No, Michael Lang stayed involved because he was the star of the show. They dissolved the partnership like 11 days after.
You're telling me that this is...
I take it back. One of them was. I take it back, Stefan. One of them was. Yes. One did stay.
You're telling me these people are covered in feces here?
Yes.
And not mud?
Yes.
At least partially. I imagine it was an amazing mix.
Yeah.
So that's 94, right? And 94 gives you Green Day's performance that kind of launches their career, and then 9 Inch Nails gives another, boo-boo mud soaked performance that sends them off into the stratosphere as well, that people remember when you think of 94. And then 99 is going to blow 94 out of the water because in 99 they have something that they didn't have before, which is a solid infrastructure.
But where is it? It's at an Air Force base.
A defunct Air Force base.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And so when they're doing the planning, that Air Force base gets decommissioned. The mayor, when they're trying to pick a spot in New York, the mayor of that town was losing so much revenue. He hits up the Woodstock people. He's like, check it. What do you want? Parking? Got it. What do you want? Standalone buildings? Got it. What do you want? Power infrastructure? Remember, when we do live performances, you have to build all these infrastructures out. The first Woodstock, they have live power lines sitting in dirt. And that's why it gets taken down for so many hours, because there's rain, because these geniuses don't think there's going to be tropical weather in upstate New York where it's going to rain in the summer. And they almost electrocuted 50,000 people. So again, and everything that had been a problem for the last 30 years, even down to like potable water, you've solved all those problems with just this location. Not one time did King Hippie Michael Laing think maybe an Air Force Base isn't the best place to put the Woodstock Music and Peace Festival, which got added on later. It was always the Woodstock Music Festival, and Peace gets added on later. So, or Arts and Peace Festival gets added on later. But in 99, they start trying to build out more commerce. They're trying to make it a little bit more interactive, and it doesn't go exactly the way they want it to go. If you think about the perfect model of interactivity in music, Coachella becomes the blueprint, because they take all the mistakes from Woodstock and use the map of a child's music fest thing, and they use that as the map to keep people kind of engaged in commerce while music is going on. I've worked several Coachellas. I don't care who was performing. And I've worked also Stagecoach, which happens right after Coachella, same place. People are always buying beer, buying merchandise, buying something, no matter what you see from your, when you rewatch these, you're like, oh man, all 120,000 people. No, there's a lot of people there, but everyone's buying stuff because there's just so much to do. 99, 94, and 69, there's really nothing to do. You're there for the music. What they learn later is, and what they're trying to do in 99 is like, we want you to be here for the music, but we want a little bit more. By the time Coachella happens, they're like, you're here for the commerce. We're locking you in a little city for 4 days, Thursday to Sunday, so you can spend money for 24 hours a day.
It's like, do you like paying the prices you do in a stadium, but for a week?
I can't even compare it to that. I can't even compare it to that, dude. It's like, to give you an idea of how insane it is, and what they were trying to do with Woodstock. So 99, they have a rave tent, and I used tent. I think it was a shed. I think they did it in a shed, right?
It was a shack. It was a love shack, baby.
It's a Air Force Base. You have huge hangars.
Yeah.
I mean, you're from the UK. You know those big shed hangar festivals they have out there. Yeah. They had space, and so they threw raves at night. So it was like constant. There was nothing that was going to stop. Coachella, they have rave stuff, but it's way smaller because there's so much more to do at night. Mm-hmm. There's so many different ways you can spend your money at night. Yeah, the bars may be shut down, but there's the all-night rave, and then you wake up, and there's a whole breakfast area. There's a beauty shop. There's a barber shop. There's clothing stores. There's a huge, like, CVS type thing called the General Store. It's massive. It is the size of a legitimate.
They've got a fucking Walmart.
Yeah, well, Walgreens, But all this is here for you, so it's like you're not leaving. In 94, what happens is, because they cut that hole in the gate, all the rules they had about ins and outs and don't bring outside liquor and food, well, you can't do, because there's a hole in the gate and people just leaving and coming back. When you get to Coachella, when you get to 99 Woodstock, they don't want you to leave and come back.
Yeah.
And they want you to buy $4 water, which isn't that bad. For some, I don't know if you guys think this is cool or not, but Paul Toilette, that does Coachella, will never have water be over, I think it's $2 a bottle, because of Woodstock 99. He felt that was the reason why it burnt down, was expensive water. So I remember one day, my job was to do the finance numbers, right? Jason, give me the reports for this bar, blah, blah, blah. And so I remember my boss was like, man, if we had to charge $6 like we're supposed to for water, we'd be making a killing it. But goddamn Toilette.
I mean, it's better than in the UK, where bars and kind of restaurant and everything has to provide water for free.
Oh, there's free. Dude, there was free water at 99.
So Jason, the reason why you wrote this article now is because there's 2 documentaries about this that are out right now.
Yes.
So why are we looking back on Woodstock 99? right now.
I felt number one, it put and I'm not a fan of the music, and it put the music in a real negative light. I didn't like the framing of, for some reason, 99 suburban white men were a problem, but in 69 suburban white men just didn't exist for some reason. The afros and the tie-dye made them go away. They turned into something different.
The guys in 69 were the first suburban white guys.
You know what I mean? That was the prototype. And I felt like the problem was, like, if you ever want people to understand how capitalism works, if you have a libertarian friend that loves to argue about the freedom of the market, Woodstock 99 is the thing to point to and be like, well, there's your free market right there. How'd that work out?
But why do you think these documentaries are made right now? I understand why you wrote your
timing. Yeah, the timing is weird. I think it's an off time. I don't know when they started making them. They probably started making them before the lockdown.
Oh, okay.
And you know,
to aim at 19, maybe.
Well, keep in mind 19. Like, I remember I was still in the business, not in 19, but before. So I remember when I bought, the same guy that was bitching about the water, he hit me up and he's like, "Jason, would you look at this?" And it was Woodstock 99 and 19, and the original 19 was 2 Woodstocks. It was one for older people that was going to be like a day, and it was going to be more nostalgia acts.
That's where you were going to go, right? Okay, keep going.
I go to them all. I did do desert trips. Desert trips.
So the one for the older people,
and then one that was going to be 3 days that was going to be more traditional, and they were going to have it in New York. New York's been kind of a problem place for music festivals for a while. My last year in the business, which I want to say is like 18, there was a 35 or 40% cancellation of festivals, meaning that tickets were sold and they had to be refunded. Like, they just didn't sell. They didn't make enough money. Music festivals in general weren't making money because people didn't necessarily have money. When we think about this, there's a reason why they look the way they do, because not a lot of people can afford this. Those wristbands people have to get into these things cost sometimes thousands of dollars, because again, you're going to be somewhere for 3 to 4 days, and you're going to be buying food that's more expensive than usual. And you're paying for everything. And it's hard to get in and out. So even if you were trying to stay at like an Airbnb or a hotel, those things are all booked up by us as staff. There's probably about 10,000 of us that have to build out something like Coachella. So we're taking all of the housing that is affordable. So unless you're like super rich, you're going to get a really nice place and helicopter in, or you're going to get one of those yurts that are pretty awesome and have the most sick ass VIP 4 days of your life. And that becomes...
I'm not going to do any of those things because I'm just going to stay home. But listen, Jason, we come up on an hour here. Do you have time to stick around for the?
I got a little bit of time. I do have to make either I'm going to make a bananas Foster French toast, or I'm going to or we're going to go get food. But I got a little bit of time.
What if I give you like 20 minutes?
Yeah.
You could do that, and then we'll jump back on for the patrons. Would that be cool?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, give me 20 minutes.
And Stefan, you too. In about 20 minutes, we'll jump back on. And the Parrot Room, we'll discuss the Hegelian dialectic. I don't know, something. Will be something really great.
Right.
For the patrons. Thanks, Jason. It was fun as always. Got to do it more often. Come on, Diet Soap. Have me on your show. I know that got a limit on white guys there, but have me on your show, and we'll talk. Huh?
Been on this year.
Yes.
This year.
Yes,
it's August, man. What are you talking about? All right. All right. Bye.